The streets smelled like death. Not the poetic kind. The real kind, the sour, gagging stink of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and something much worse beneath it all. You could hear it in the silence of towns where laughter had died off weeks ago. You could feel it in the strange way people looked at one another, like each breath might be their last. Somewhere in the middle of all that fear and filth walked a man dressed in layers of cloth, leather gloves, and a long, bird-like mask stuffed with herbs. His name? Nobody cared. To them, he was just the plague doctor. That strange figure, half ghost and half man, was supposed to be their only hope. But hope, in those days, was fragile, just like the knowledge they thought they had. And if you were unlucky enough to be a plague doctor in medieval Europe, well, let's just say it sucked more than you might think. It wasn't the dramatic kind of suffering. It was the slow, grinding, day-after-day misery that only the Middle Ages could serve up. These so-called doctors were barely trained, if at all. Many weren't doctors in any real sense. They were barbers, clergy, or poor souls desperate for coin. Cities and villages hired them because no one else would go near the sick. And once hired, they'd be expected to walk into hell with nothing more than vinegar, a stick, and a prayer. Imagine that. You wake up in a wooden shack that leaks when it rains, your blanket damp, your breakfast a slice of hard bread. Before you've even fully opened your eyes, someone's banging at the door, begging for help. Their sister has the plague, or their husband, or their entire house. And you, exhausted, aching, and terrified, have no choice but to go. You put on your mask, the one that's supposed to protect you, but smells like herbs and mold and never fits quite right. Then out you go, walking through empty streets littered with straw and waste, heading straight into the worst day of your life. Every single day. And let's talk about that outfit for a second. It wasn't just to look creepy, though it certainly did the job. The long coat was meant to protect the skin. The gloves helped avoid direct contact. The mask's beak was stuffed with flowers, spices, and vinegar-soaked rags because people believed disease traveled through bad air, what they called miasma. So they figured if you blocked the stink, you blocked the plague. It didn't work, of course, but it gave them just enough courage to keep walking forward. Plague doctors weren't seen as heroes. They were seen as bad luck. People crossed the street to avoid them. Children cried when they appeared. Some folks threw rocks or slammed doors. And still they came. Into houses where families huddled around dying loved ones. Into rooms where bodies were already cold. Into neighborhoods where carts of corpses passed by like clockwork. The thing is, most of these doctors knew they were probably going to die. They knew the mask didn't work. They knew the herbs were just desperate guesses. And yet, they still showed up. That's what makes this story more than just history. It's about people, scared, stumbling people, trying to do something good when everything around them was falling apart. And it gets worse. See, if you were a plague doctor, your job didn't end at trying to save lives. You also had to keep records. That's right. In the middle of chaos, someone had to count the bodies, list the symptoms, and decide which homes should be boarded up. You had to break bad news, fight off desperate families, and sometimes burn belongings or people. Not always with your own hands, but sometimes just by giving the order. That weighed on you. Heavy, quiet, deadly. Sometimes the locals didn't just avoid plague doctors. They blamed them. If the doctor came to your village and more people died after, it was his fault. If the doctor touched someone and they didn't get better, he was cursed. A few doctors were even attacked, beaten, or murdered. That long coat didn't protect against pitchforks. And even if you survived the violence and the plague, you didn't really live. You couldn't go back to normal life. Who would marry a man who'd walked among the dead? Who'd let their children near someone who'd breathed plague air for months? Many of them were left alone. Some wandered from village to village. Some turned bitter. Some disappeared entirely. We like to think of doctors today as men and women in white coats, calm and clean, with bright hospitals and organized tools. But this was different. It was mud and rot and rats. It was masks that didn't help. It was guesses, prayers, and hopelessness. And it sucked. It sucked in ways that are hard to fully grasp from a warm bed in the 21st century. Even worse, many of them weren't paid. Cities promised wages, but often couldn't follow through. Some doctors died before they ever saw a coin. Others spent their final months writing letters, begging for food, or arguing with town councils over missing salaries. A few lucky ones were paid in wine, chickens, or shelter, but never peace. And all this time, the plague kept spreading. It came in waves. Sometimes it would slow down, and people would start to hope again. The markets reopened. The churches filled. Then, bam, another outbreak. Another panic. More bodies. More fear. And each time, a handful of men in bird masks would return to the streets, dragging their feet, coughing into their sleeves, praying they wouldn't be next. Some of them left journals behind. Strange, handwritten notes with misspelled words and fevered thoughts. They wrote about things they didn't understand: boils, black spots, sudden fevers, bleeding from the eyes. They wrote about loneliness, about how quiet the world became. One doctor wrote that the only thing louder than death was the silence after it. Not all of them were kind. Some grew cold, careless. When you've seen 100 people die, the 101st doesn't hit the same. That's part of why plague doctors became feared. They looked like death, yes, but sometimes they acted like it too. Detached, distant, less like healers and more like watchers. Witnesses to suffering, doing what they could, which wasn't much. And then there were the moments that haunted them, the little ones. A child reaching out for help. A mother refusing to let go of her dead baby. A man begging not to be buried alive, eyes still moving even as the others declared him gone. These weren't big events. They didn't make it into official records, but they lived in memories carved deep into the minds of the men behind the masks. So why did they do it? Why do they keep showing up? Some did it for money. Some did it for God. Some had nothing else left. But maybe, just maybe, a few did it because they cared. Not about all people. Not even about justice. Just about one person, one moment, one chance to ease someone's pain, even if it meant nothing in the end. And that brings us to one man. His name was Leonce. Not famous. Not rich. Not particularly skilled. But he was a plague doctor. And what happened to him? Well, it's a story that hasn't been told much. He wasn't from a big city. He started in a small village at the edge of the forest, where most people still believed more in spirits than science. He wasn't supposed to be a doctor. He was a baker's son. But when their appointed doctor ran away, and the bishop's messenger offered Leonce 5 silver coins to take the job, he said yes. Because 5 coins could buy bread, could fix a roof, could help his sister. He thought he'd only have to treat a few coughs, maybe lance a boil or 2. He was wrong. Leonce's first day as plague doctor started with a knock on the church door. It was Father Thorn, shaking, whispering that a family had locked themselves inside their home and wouldn't come out. The smell coming from the windows was awful. No one knew if they were alive or dead, and no one else was willing to find out. Leonce took his mask and went. And what he saw in that house, well, that's where the Real story begins. We'll come back to Leonce. But before we open that door, before we step over the threshold and into a room that would change his life forever, let's take a moment. Breathe. Because once you cross into the world of plague doctors, there's no going back. The questions get heavier. The air gets darker. And what happened in that house? It's still waiting to be told. The house stood at the edge of the village, where the cobbled path gave way to thick weeds and bare earth. The door was shut tight, a crooked wooden plank wedged through the handles from the outside. Someone had nailed a painted red X across it days ago, the kind of mark that whispered one word to anyone who saw it. Asterisk, asterisk, plague, asterisk, asterisk. Leon stood in front of it, sweating under his thick coat. The early morning fog clung to everything, including the inside of his mask. He tried to wipe his forehead, but the leather gloves just smeared the dampness across his brow. He hadn't even been a plague doctor for a full day, and already he was shaking. He could hear something from inside. Not voices, not words, just movement. A slow, dragging thump. Something brushing against the floorboards. Then silence. He looked at Father Thorn, who was standing a few paces back, clutching his rosary so hard his knuckles were white. They were alive 2 days ago, the priest whispered. The boy shouted through the window, said his mother was sick, said he didn't want to leave her. Leonce looked at the windows. Shutters closed. Curtains drawn. He swallowed hard. "What, they're all gone?" he asked. Father Thorne didn't answer. Leon stepped forward. The wooden plank blocking the door was old, brittle at the edges. He lifted it slowly and laid it on the ground. The door creaked when he pushed it. Every part of him screamed to stop, to turn back, to lie and say they were all dead and spare himself whatever waited inside. But he didn't. The door opened. The smell hit him first. Worse than he expected. Thick, sour wet, like something rotting beneath the floorboards. He covered his nose out of instinct, even though the mask was already supposed to block the odor. The beak was filled with lavender, mint, and dried rose petals. Useless. He could still smell everything. The room was dim, but enough light filtered in from the door to show the chaos. A table had been overturned. A bowl lay smashed on the floor, its contents dried and crusted. A chair was toppled in the corner. And in the middle of it all, curled up against the far wall, was the shape of a boy. Leon's froze. The boy looked about 9, maybe 10. His clothes were too big for him. He was barefoot. His face was pale, but his eyes were open, wide, watching. "Are you Leonce?" the boy asked. It startled him, hearing his name from this child's mouth. "Yes," Leon said. His voice cracked. "I'm here to help." The boy didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just pointed toward the doorway that led into the back of the house. "She's still in there," the boy said. "She stopped breathing yesterday, but I don't think she's dead." Leonce wanted to ask what he meant, but he already knew. People clung to hope like a raft in a storm. Some couldn't let go even when the body was cold. Some truly believed the dead would wake up. Others were right, at least for a little while. He stepped into the next room. The windows were all shut here too, but light peeked through a crack in the shutters. Dust floated in the beams like ash. There was a bed against the far wall, and on it lay a woman. Her skin was waxy and gray. Her lips cracked. Her eyes half open. Flies circled around her motionless form, landing on the sheets, on her arms, in her hair. One of her hands hung off the bed, limp, and her fingers were curled like claws. Leonce didn't speak. He walked slowly to the bed, reaching into his satchel for a small mirror. He placed it near her lips. No fog. No breath. She was gone. He turned to leave, but something made him stop. A whisper. Not a voice exactly. A shift in the room. The sound of fabric moving. He looked back at the bed and saw her fingers twitch. Leon stepped closer. The flies scattered. Her eyelids fluttered. And then, suddenly, her hand shot up and grabbed his wrist. He dropped the mirror. It clattered to the floor, bouncing under the bed. He couldn't move. Her grip was cold, but strong. She looked straight at him. "You're too late," she rasped. Then her hand loosened. She was still. Leon stumbled backward, heart pounding. He'd heard of this. Final reflexes. Sudden last movements. The body not knowing it's dead. Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't dead. Not entirely. He left the room. The boy was still sitting where he'd been. Still watching. "She said it wasn't the plague," he mumbled. "She said it was something older. Something colder." Leonce crouched in front of him. "Do you have any symptoms?" The boy shook his head. "I'm not sick. I haven't even touched her since she got worse. She told me not to." Leonce glanced back toward the room. "What do you mean, something older?" "She said it came from the forest," the boy whispered. "That something was buried and shouldn't have been found." Leonce felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. He stood up and walked to the front door. Father Thorne was still outside, pacing, whispering prayers under his breath. "She's dead," Leonce said. "The boy's not sick. Yet." The priest nodded. "We'll watch the house. Keep him in. You'll come back." Leonce didn't answer. He walked away, feeling like the mask was suffocating him. The herbs inside had lost their scent. The leather strap dug into his skin. The world looked darker than it had before. He thought of the woman's hand. The grip. The look in her eyes. "You're too late." What she meant. Too late for what? To save her? Or something else? Back in the village, people avoided him. They always did. He passed a group of children playing with stones. They stopped and watched him pass in silence. A man selling onions crossed himself when Leonce walked by. An old woman spat near his feet. He ignored them. At home, he took off the mask and sat down. His hand shook. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. And already, he felt something growing inside him. Not sickness, not yet, but dread. Heavy. cold. That night, he dreamt of the boy's house. He stood in the bedroom, watching the woman on the bed. But this time, she wasn't lying still. She was sitting up, eyes glowing, whispering things he couldn't understand. The walls were covered in handprints. Tiny ones. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Each one smeared in ash. He woke up gasping. Outside, the morning fog was thicker than ever. The village bell rang once. Twice. Then fell silent. Leonce dressed slowly. He reached for his mask, paused, then put it on. The scent of dried lavender hit his nose again, weaker than before. He wasn't sure if the boy would still be alive. He wasn't sure if the village would still be standing. But he knew one thing. He had to go back, even if it meant facing whatever was waiting in that house. Because the plague was only part of the story, and the rest was just beginning. Leonce moved like a man with a weight tied to every limb. The early sun hadn't broken through the mist yet, and the whole village was quiet, too quiet. No dogs barking, no merchants shouting, not even the crows. Just the soft squish of his boots in the mud and the occasional cough echoing in the distance. The kind of silence that felt watched. He walked past the old well, where yesterday 2 children had been laughing and tossing rocks into the water. Today, the stones were still there, but the laughter was gone. No children, just the damp, rope-hanging limp, swaying gently, as if someone had pulled it recently and let go. He didn't stop. When he reached the house again, the red X on the door had faded just slightly from the morning dew, but it was still clear. A warning, a seal, a silent scream, scrawled in paint. The priest wasn't outside this time. No one was. Leonce hesitated at the step. He could still leave. No one had told him to come back. But something about the boy's face, his calmness, the way he'd pointed to his mother like he'd already accepted her fate, something about it gnawed at him. This didn't feel like just another house touched by the plague. It felt deeper, like the roots went beneath the village. Or beneath him. He knocked. Once. Twice. Then he slowly opened the door. The boy was sitting in the same place. But he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him. Not his mother. This one had kind eyes and a nervous smile, though her fingers twitched as she cradled a steaming bowl. The smell of soup, real soup with garlic and herbs, floated through the air. "I came by an hour ago," the woman said before Leonce could ask. He was cold, hungry. I couldn't just leave him. Leonce stared at her, unsure whether to be grateful or furious. "You were in here?" With her body still in the next room. The woman nodded. "I covered her. I didn't look too closely. I didn't want the boy to be alone." Leonce glanced at the back room. The door was still shut. Something about that made his skin prickle. "Thank you," he said at last. "But it's not safe." She nodded slowly. "I know." Her eyes didn't quite meet his. She stood up, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked past him. "I'll be nearby if he needs more food," she said as she stepped outside. He shouldn't be alone. The boy didn't speak for a long time after she left. Just stared at the bowl in his lap, as if soup was a luxury too large to take in all at once. Finally, he spoke. "She used to hum," he said. Leonce looked at him. "My mother. Before she got sick, she hummed while she cooked. She'd always stir the pot the same way, 3 times clockwise, once counterclockwise. She said it kept bad luck from spoiling the broth." Leonce managed a small smile beneath his mask. "That's an old belief." She believed in a lot of old things, the boy said. She said the plague was angry, that it wasn't just sickness, that it was punishment. Leonce didn't like the way he said that. Punishment from who? The boy shrugged. From it. The thing in the woods. The words sent a chill down Leonce's spine. He heard that phrase before, twice actually. Once from a dying man whose fever made him ramble about black trees and a whispering voice. And again, from an old letter sealed in the back of an apothecary's journal, warning that the forest beyond the village was rotting from the inside out. But no one ever explained what it was. "You mean superstition," Leonce said, more firmly than he felt. The boy didn't respond, just sipped his soup slowly, as if he were measuring time by the spoonful. Leonce stood up and walked to the back room. He needed to confirm that the woman, asterisk the mother asterisk, hadn't moved, that there was no reason to believe anything other than death had taken her. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The body was still there, the blanket draped over it, The air felt heavier than before. The dust in the room seemed to hang motionless, like even gravity was uncertain. He stepped closer. The woman's hand was still hanging over the side of the bed. But something had changed. There were scratches on the floor, four thin lines, like fingernails dragging toward the door. And beneath the bed, he saw it, his mirror, not where it had fallen yesterday, but closer to the wall, as if it had been pushed or kicked. Leonce knelt down and reached for it. The air beneath the bed was cold, far too cold for a summer morning. He pulled the mirror out and stared at it. Nothing unusual. Then he looked up and saw the curtain over the window swaying. Just slightly. No wind. Leon stood, backed away, shut the door slowly behind him. The boy looked up from his soup. She used to say names had power, he said. That if you said the right name at the wrong time, things could come through. Through what? The air, the ground, even your dreams. Leon swallowed hard. He didn't believe in curses. He didn't believe in haunted forests or angry spirits or ancient wrongs buried under oak trees. But he did believe in patterns. And he was seeing one now. He looked at the boy, then down at the scratches on the floor just beyond the threshold of the room. Have you heard anything at night? Leonce asked. The boy didn't hesitate. Yes. What? She hums. Leonce went cold. Are you sure? The boy nodded. I don't sleep anymore. I wait for her to stop. But she never does. Leonce rose to his feet, satchel slung across his chest. His breath was tight in his throat. He didn't know what was happening in this house. But it wasn't just the plague. Something else was here. Something quieter, older. And he was starting to believe the boy's mother was right. This wasn't a sickness. This was a warning. Outside, the village bell rang once again. But this time it didn't stop. It rang again, and again, until it didn't sound like a bell at all, but like an alarm. Leonce turned toward the sound. Then he turned back to the boy. Stay here, he said. I always do, the boy replied. Leonce stepped out into the mist. And just as he closed the door behind him, he heard it. A hum, soft, distant, coming from the trees. And just beneath it, layered like a second voice. The sound of scratching. From the inside, Leonce didn't look back. He couldn't. His feet moved faster than his thoughts, sloshing through the mud as the village bell continued its slow, haunting cry. It wasn't a frantic clanging, the kind used for fires or invasions. It was measured, rhythmic, a call meant to draw people out. Or maybe draw something in. The fog was thicker now, curling around the cottages like smoke from a dying hearth. It made everything blurry. Familiar paths looked foreign. Doorways melted into shadows. For a moment, Leonce wondered if he was dreaming, if he'd fallen asleep beside the boy and was now trapped in some fevered vision, some plague-born nightmare. But no, this was real. The cold in his chest was real. The smell of mold and burnt wood was real. And the distant humming he kept hearing, that was definitely real. As he passed the blacksmith's home, the bell finally stopped. Just stopped. No fading echo. No final toll. Just silence again. Leonce turned the corner and found a small crowd gathered in the square. Maybe a dozen villagers. Eyes wide. Faces pale. All of them looking in the same direction, toward the chapel. That's when he saw it. Another red X. But this time, it wasn't on a house. It was painted across the church doors. A long, dripping smear, still fresh. The paint hadn't dried yet, and some of it had run down the wood like blood. Leonce's stomach turned. The chapel was supposed to be a safe haven, a place untouched by the sickness, a sanctuary. If the plague had reached it, if it had touched the priest and his acolytes, then everything these people believed in would start to unravel. He walked slowly toward the steps. No one stopped him. No one followed. The air near the doors was different, sharper like the edge of a blade. Leonce raised his gloved hand and pushed. The door creaked open. Inside, the chapel was dark. The candles were still burning, but barely. Tiny flickers struggling against a deep, unnatural gloom. Dust floated in the air like ash. The stained glass windows, once beautiful and bright, were now dull. The light behind them filtered through the ever-present mist. And on the altar, there was something lying there. Not someone. Something. Leonce stepped closer. It was a mask. One of his own. A plague doctor's beaked mask, the same as the one he wore, but old, cracked, covered in soot, and beneath it, a rolled parchment with a wax seal he didn't recognize, twisted and lopsided like a spiral drawn by a trembling hand. He hesitated, then reached for the scroll. The wax crumbled as he broke it open. The letter inside wasn't addressed to anyone. It was written in tight, nervous handwriting, and the ink was smudged in places as if the writer had been crying or shaking while they wrote it. It's not a disease. Not really. It feeds on belief, on fear, on memory. You think the mask protects you, but it doesn't. It marks you. That's why it follows us. Why it always knows. Burn your tools. Forget the names. And never go into the forest. It's waiting. Leonce read the words twice. Then a third time. The humming was back again, louder now. Not in his head. Behind him. He turned quickly, heart pounding. Nothing there. Just the empty pews. Shadows stretching too far. Candles flickering in time with his pulse. He backed out of the chapel, scroll still in hand, and met the villagers' eyes again. Some were praying. Others were crying. A few just stared, as if waiting for him to explain something. Asterisk anything. Asterisk. But he had no words. The priest was gone. The altar had been desecrated. And the mask, that old abandoned mask, felt like a warning, or a promise. Something had changed in the village, and the plague no longer felt like the worst of their problems. That night, Leon stayed in the boy's house. Not because he was needed, not because it was safe, because he couldn't trust the village anymore. There was something about the boy, something steady. He didn't flinch, didn't panic. He just existed, like a stone in the river, unmoved by the current. It was strange and eerie and, in a way, comforting. They sat in silence for most of the evening. The boy ate the rest of his soup. Leonce lit a few candles. And outside, the fog never lifted. Not even once. Eventually, Leonce broke the silence. "What happened to your father?" The boy didn't look up. "He went into the woods," he said quietly, "to find the healer. When? 3 weeks ago." Leonce's brow furrowed. "There is no healer in the woods." The boy finally met his eyes. "I know." Something about the way he said it made Leonce shiver. Later, after the boy had fallen asleep, Leonce sat by the fire, staring into the embers. The scroll was still in his pocket. He hadn't shown it to anyone. Part of him didn't want to. Sharing it would make it real. He thought about the scratches on the floor, the shifting mirror, the red X on the chapel doors. He thought about the priest's face when he'd first brought him to this house. And then he thought about the forest. He hadn't entered it in years. No one had. Not since the sickness began. They said it was cursed, that the trees whispered, that animals didn't return if they went in too deep. The official explanation? Superstition. Fear. Madness brought on by isolation and grief. But now he wasn't so sure. He rose from the chair and walked to the boy's room. The door was ajar. The boy was asleep, curled beneath his blanket. The window was open. Leonce frowned. He hadn't opened it. He stepped closer, peered outside. The fog was thick, swirling in strange patterns, like it was moving against the wind, like it was forming shapes. And from the edge of the trees, just barely visible through the mist, a figure stood watching. Tall, still, wearing a mask. Not a plague doctor's. Something older. Something wrong. Leonce blinked, and the figure was gone. He shut the window quickly, locked it, and drew the curtain. But the chill remained. He returned to the fire, heart racing, thoughts tangled. Whatever was happening in the village, it wasn't just a wave of sickness. It wasn't just bad air or dirty water or rats in the cellar. This was something else. Something patient. Something watching. And Leonce knew. Asterisk, he knew asterisk. That the answers weren't in the chapel, or the village square, or even the mayor's sealed books. They were in the forest. The one place no one dared to go. And tomorrow, at first light, he would go there, even if it meant not coming back. The morning light never came. At least, not in the way Leonce remembered it. He expected some pale glimmer slipping through the mist, some golden crack in the horizon to split the gray. But when he opened the door at dawn, it was like the world had forgotten how to rise. No birdsong, no breeze, just silence and fog. He wrapped his cloak tighter around his chest and stepped into the cold. The boy was still sleeping, or pretending to. Leonce hadn't woken him. He didn't plan to. What he was about to do, no one needed to follow. Especially not a child who'd already seen too much. He passed the baker's home. The windows were shut tight. Curtains drawn. Smoke from the chimney curled weakly into the sky, disappearing almost immediately into the mist. Everyone was doing the same thing now. Hiding, waiting, hoping someone else would fix it. Hoping he would fix it. He didn't feel like a savior. Not even close. At the edge of the village stood a worn wooden sign. The letters had long since faded, but he remembered what it used to say. No entry beyond this point, for the safety of all. Beyond the sign, the forest. Thick, gnarled, older than memory. Leonce hesitated, just for a moment. Then he stepped past it. The change was instant. It wasn't just darker beneath the trees. It was quiet, an unnatural kind of quiet, the kind that pressed in on your ears like diving too deep into water. Every footstep sounded too loud. Every breath felt borrowed. The path ahead had nearly vanished. Roots twisted over the soil like claws. Moss clung to the trunks of trees, slick with dew. And the fog didn't sit above the ground anymore. It moved, flowed, as if it had somewhere to be. Leonce tightened his grip on the leather pouch at his belt. Inside were a few herbs, a flask of vinegar, and a folded sheet of linen soaked in rosemary oil. Old plague doctor tricks, warding charms passed down by those who came before. But even he knew they wouldn't help now. Still, the act of carrying them felt like armor. He pushed forward. Branches scraped his mask as he walked, long fingers dragging across his hood. Somewhere in the distance, a twig cracked. Not the sound of an animal, but something slower. He paused, waited. Nothing followed. Not yet. As the minutes dragged on, he began to feel it. Not fear, not exactly, but something deeper. A pressure, like the forest itself, was aware of him. Watching, breathing. At one point, he passed a tree with a red ribbon tied around its trunk. Then another. Then a third. They weren't recent. The fabric was frayed, nearly rotted. And the way they were tied, not like a marker, more like a warning. He began counting them without meaning to. 5, 10, 17. And then he reached it, the clearing. It wasn't marked on any map. No one in the village spoke of it, not directly. But every story about the forest circled back to this place. The healers, the disappearances, the rumors of those who'd come searching and never returned. In the center stood a small stone structure, barely taller than a man, half buried in the earth, overgrown with ivy and moss. It looked like an altar or a tomb. There were symbols etched along the surface, but time and weather had erased most of them. All except one, a spiral. The same spiral that was stamped in the wax seal on the scroll. Leonce stepped closer. The air here felt colder, even though the wind hadn't picked up. It was a dead cold, the kind that sank into your lungs and made you question whether you were truly alive. He knelt beside the structure and brushed away some dirt from the markings. Beneath it, barely visible, was a name. Remede, not a villager's name, not one he recognized, but old, older than the village, maybe. He heard the humming again, closer this time, not behind him, below. He froze. The ground beneath his boots didn't move. Not obviously, but the earth felt hollow, like he was standing above something breathing, or something trapped. He backed away slowly, and that's when he saw them. Figures, at the tree line, dozens, standing still among the trunks, partially hidden by the mist. No movement, no sound, just watching. Leonce's heart kicked hard against his ribs. They wore masks, not plague masks, something stranger, bone white, hollow eyes, almost animal-like but wrong, twisted. He didn't speak, didn't dare. He turned and began walking, quickly but not running. Not yet, just steps firm enough to say, "I see you, but I'm not afraid." Even if it was a lie. He didn't look back. The trees closed in tighter, and with every step, he could feel them. Following, not running, not chasing, just walking the same path. As if curious, or patient, he reached the ribboned trees again, counted them backwards. 17, 14, 9. He stepped faster. By the time he reached the edge of the forest, The mist had grown so thick he could barely see the sign. But he crossed the boundary, and when he finally looked behind him, nothing. No figures, no masks, just trees, still and silent. Back in the village, the boy was waiting outside the house. He looked up at Leonce without a word, then glanced past him toward the woods. "They followed you," he said quietly. Leonce didn't deny it. He dropped his pouch by the door and sat on the step, pulling off his gloves with stiff fingers. "What does it mean?" he asked. The boy shrugged. "They're choosing." "Choosing what?" The boy didn't answer. And then, from somewhere deeper in the village, came a scream. Not just fear, despair. Leonce stood immediately, grabbing the pouch, already running toward the sound. When he reached the center square, a crowd had formed again. A woman on her knees, clutching her husband. His skin was dark, veiny. His lips purple. His eyes wide and lifeless. He died quickly. Too quickly. Leonce knelt beside him and peeled back the man's tunic. There it was. A mark. Not a boil. Not a rash. A spiral. Etched into the skin like it had been burned there from the inside. The same spiral. Leonce looked up at the villagers. No one spoke. And somewhere, just beneath the silence, the humming returned. Faint, but closer. And for the first time, Leonce realized the plague wasn't killing at random. It was choosing, and it had started with him. The villagers didn't ask questions, not aloud, but their eyes did. Suspicion flickered across their faces like candlelight on damp stone. Leonce didn't blame them. A man had just died in seconds, with a mark no one recognized but him, and he had returned from the woods just moments before it happened. He stood slowly, trying not to betray the shake in his legs. The boy had followed him into the square, his small hands tucked deep into the sleeves of his oversized coat. He said nothing, only looked at the spiral burned into the man's skin. Not with fear, but recognition, as if he'd seen it before. Leonce stepped away from the body and motioned for the others to give space. "We'll burn the body before nightfall," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Make sure no one touches him, not even his clothes." A few of the villagers nodded, hesitant, but no one moved closer. He didn't wait for more whispers. He turned and left, the boy trailing behind. Back inside the small house, Leonce bolted the door and removed his mask. The air inside smelled faintly of rosemary, but it did little to calm his nerves. He poured water into a basin and washed his hands, scrubbing until his skin turned raw. The boy sat quietly near the hearth, watching the embers. Leonce finally broke the silence. "You've seen that mark before." The boy didn't answer right away. He poked the fire with a stick, then said softly, "My father had one. Before he died. He said it came in a dream." Leonce paused. "A dream?" The boy nodded. He said someone whispered to him. "In the woods." Said he was chosen. Then he got sick. Fast. Leonce dried his hands and turned toward him. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because they wouldn't believe me," the boy said plainly. "And I didn't want to end up like him." Leonce sat down slowly. His legs ached. His mind raced. He thought of the figures in the woods. The humming. The altar. The spiral. And now, the dream. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What did the whisper say? The boy didn't look up. It said it wasn't a sickness. Not like people thought. It was a choosing. A weighing of something. A kind of test. Leonce felt a chill settle on his shoulders. He remembered something his mentor once said years ago when he was just learning how to treat the sick. The man had been old and sharp, a scholar and a skeptic. There's always more beneath the skin, the mentor warned. Not just blood and bone. Sometimes you'll find secrets. And the plague doesn't kill for no reason. At the time, Leonce thought it was metaphor. A warning to observe closely. Now, he wasn't so sure. He stood abruptly and pulled the scroll from his pack, the one he had found sealed with the spiral. He unrolled it again, hoping some new meaning would appear. But the words remained the same. Asterisk. When the earth has tired of man, it sends no fire. No flood. It sends rot. Asterisk. Asterisk. The marked will show the way. Asterisk. Leonce stared at the parchment, feeling like he was sinking into something far older and deeper than medicine could reach. There was a knock at the door. 3 quick raps. Then silence. He and the boy froze. A second knock followed, slower. He reached for the mask, slid it back over his face, and moved to the door. "Who is it?" he called through the wood. "Jacques," came a voice, thin, shaky. It's about my daughter." Leonce unbolted the door just enough to peek out. Jacques stood in the fog, hunched, his eyes red and wet. Behind him, the world was silent again. "She's burning," he whispered. "Her skin. She's not like the others." Leonce stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind him. "Take me." They hurried through the narrow lanes, past shuttered homes and silent windows. The villagers were watching, always watching now, some out of fear, others out of quiet blame. Inside Jacques' home, the heat hit Leonce before he reached the girl's room. It was thick, stifling. The girl lay on a straw bed soaked in sweat, her eyes glassy, her lips cracked, and on her chest, centered above her heart, was the spiral. But it was glowing, faint, like hot coals beneath her skin. Jacques fell to his knees beside her, mumbling prayers that sounded like apologies. Leonce moved closer, gently brushing the girl's hair back. She wasn't unconscious. She was staring at something. "Can you hear me?" Leonce asked. Her lips parted. "They're coming," she whispered. "The ones who never died." He leaned in. "What do you mean?" Her breath rattled. "They walked into the woods when the village first burned. The sick ones. They didn't scream, just disappeared." Leonce tried to make sense of it. "When did this happen?" "Long ago," she said. "Before we were born. Before the plague had a name. They made a promise. Now they're coming back." The spiral flared, just for a moment. A sickly red. Then the girl's body went still. Jacques sobbed beside her, clutching her hand, begging her to wake up. Leonce stood, his mind reeling. This wasn't illness. This wasn't natural. He stepped out of the house before anyone could speak to him. The night was coming fast now, darker than before. The mist hung heavier. The humming began again. He looked toward the forest. And for the first time, he realized it wasn't the people who were infected. It was the land. Whatever was buried in that clearing, whatever Remede meant, it was spreading again. Not as a plague, but as something older, deeper, something that remembered who had once walked away from it. And now it was calling them back. Leonce didn't go home. He walked toward the church. Not to pray, to dig. Because if the plague wasn't killing randomly, someone had started it. And that meant someone still knew how to stop it. The old church hadn't seen a congregation in years. Its bell hadn't rung in months. The wooden doors sagged on rusted hinges, and the stone steps were cracked from too many seasons of frost. Still, the villagers left it standing. No one dared tear it down. Not because it was sacred, because they feared what might be buried beneath it. Leonce pushed the door open slowly. It groaned loud enough to startle the crows from the roof. The inside smelled of mold and old wax. Dust floated in the air like ash. The stained glass windows were clouded, their colors long since faded, but in the dim light, he could still make out faint shapes, figures with blank faces, arms outstretched, robes trailing into spirals. He lit a lantern and stepped inside. The pews were warped with moisture. Rats scattered at the sound of his boots. At the front of the room stood a small altar carved from blackened stone. Most assumed it was a remnant from an older chapel, something left behind when the church was built. But Leonce had always found it strange that the floorboards around it didn't match the rest of the structure, like someone had built over something they didn't understand. He knelt in front of it, brushing away cobwebs. Then he pulled a crowbar from beneath his cloak. The wood beneath the altar was softer than he expected. Rotten even, it gave way under the metal with little resistance. Each plank he pried up revealed more of what lay below. A staircase. Narrow, steep, carved directly into stone. He lowered the lantern and peered in. It smelled of damp earth and old blood. He didn't hesitate. Each step creaked under his weight. The further he descended, the tighter the walls became. The air was cold and wet. His breath steamed in front of him. He counted each step in his head, trying to stay calm. When he reached the bottom, he found a small chamber, no bigger than a root cellar. The walls were stone, and in the center sat a pedestal, cracked and crumbling, covered in dust. And there it was again, the spiral, etched deep into the stone. But this one was different. It was surrounded by writing, ancient script half erased by time. But Leonce could still make out one phrase, repeated again and again. To heal is to remember. He didn't know what it meant, but made his skin crawl. He lifted the lantern higher and spotted a bundle of cloth tucked in the corner. He knelt, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a mask, like his but older, more primitive. The beak was shorter, the leather cracked. Along its edges were carved small symbols, some of which matched the writing on the pedestal. There was also a journal, bound in brittle leather. No name, just a spiral pressed into the cover. Leonce opened it slowly. The handwriting was sharp, hurried. Pages filled with notes, sketches, and diagrams of the human body, but not all of them were natural. Some showed marks on the skin that glowed. Others showed organs that weren't entirely human. One passage caught his eye. The first plague was not a punishment. It was a request, an offering of knowledge wrapped in death. We feared it. We buried it, but never left. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. The deeper he read, the more he realized whoever wrote this had lived during the first outbreak, the one people had forgotten or chosen to forget. We were told to choose, to give one and spare many. But we refused, and so the choosing began without us. He sat back against the wall, trying to piece it together. This wasn't about sickness. It was about something older than the village, older than medicine, a force or presence that had once struck a bargain with humanity. And when that bargain was broken, it began taking what it wanted. The plague was not random. It was ritual. He closed the journal and looked back at the mask. Why keep it here? Hidden? Unless someone had known this day would come again. Someone who wanted it forgotten. Leonce made his way back up the stairs, the journal pressed tightly against his chest. The church was silent when he emerged. Outside, the fog had thickened. The mist wrapped around buildings and crept through cracks. It was spreading faster now, covering the village like a shroud. He ran back to his home. The boy was awake, pacing the floor. He looked up as Leonce entered. "They're at the edge of town," he said, eyes wide. I saw them, standing still, watching. Leonce dropped the journal on the table and unrolled the pages. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. The boy stared at the spiral. His face paled. "That's the same mark they put on the trees." Leonce leaned closer. These marks, they weren't warnings. They were instructions, coordinates, a map of who would be taken. The boy blinked slowly. "But why us?" Leonce hesitated. "Because someone broke a promise. A long time ago. And now, whatever made that promise has come to collect." He didn't know how else to explain it. Not yet. But the journal held the pieces. They just had to fit them together before it was too late. Outside, the wind picked up. A low, rattling howl slid through the village, echoing off rooftops and alleys. Then came the bells. Not from a church. From a forest. Soft at first. Distant. Then louder. Rhythmic. Measured. Like a call. Leonce moved to the window. Through the mist, he saw shapes, too many to count, lined up along the road that led into the trees. All of them still. All of them wearing those same blank, bone-white masks. And slowly they began to walk. Toward the village. No footsteps. No voices. Just bells. And behind them, the fog pulsed like a living thing. Leonce didn't speak. He only turned back to the boy and handed him a journal. "Stay here. Lock the door." "What are you going to do?" the boy asked, voice trembling. Leonce pulled the older mask from his coat and slipped it over his head. "I'm going to ask them why they came back." Then he stepped into the fog. The fog swallowed him almost instantly. Each step forward muffled the world behind him. Houses, voices, even the faint warmth of firelight. All of it faded as if he were walking not just through mist, but into memory, into something older than the village itself. The lantern in his hand barely reached a few feet ahead. The silence was complete, broken only by the soft, unrelenting toll of the bells. He kept walking. The road beneath his feet had turned from cobblestone to packed earth, then to something softer. Damp. The forest was drawing near, though he could no longer see the trees, only their presence. The air was colder now, and still, the masked figures walked. Dozens of them. Their outlines were clearer now, silhouettes drifting like ghosts. Some moved in a slow, almost mechanical rhythm. Others glided as if untouched by the ground. All wore the same expressionless masks. White, smooth, and without eyes. just a mouth slit carved too wide and too still. Leon slowed as he neared them. They didn't speak, didn't react. They simply stood, lining both sides of the old path, forming a corridor of silence and bells. Then, one of them stepped forward. Its mask was different, older, cracked, and stained around the mouth. Its robes were tattered, but its posture was impossibly still. Leon's felt his breath catch. It raised one hand slowly, not in greeting, in recognition. "You wear it," came a voice, not from the mask, but from the air itself, deep and echoing. The mask of the first. Leon's forced himself to answer, even as his voice faltered. "What are you?" The figure's head tilted slightly. "We are the kept, the forgotten, the ones who remained faithful when man chose to forget." "The plague," Leon said. "It's not a disease, is it?" "No," the voice replied. "It is memory, a reminder, a return." Leonce's grip tightened on the lantern. Return of what? Of the balance. There was movement now, subtle and slow. The figure surrounding the path took a step forward, then another, until they all stood perfectly aligned. Like an audience. Watching. Waiting. Leonce's heart pounded. He thought of the journal, of the phrase carved in stone beneath the church. Asterisk to heal is to remember. Asterisk if this was about memory, about forgotten promises, then maybe the answer wasn't in medicine at all. Maybe it was in truth. "You said man chose to forget," Leonce said carefully. "Forget what?" The lead figure stepped closer. Leonce could see its feet now, bare with blackened toes. The bargain. When the first sickness came, they were told the cost. One life, chosen willingly, would spare the many. But they refused. So the earth chose instead. And now? Leonce asked, "What do you want now?" There was a long silence. Then the voice whispered, almost tenderly, a name. Leonce blinked. A name offered freely, as the old pact once required. Not from fear, not from guilt, from understanding. Leonce's mind raced. "You want a sacrifice?" "No," the voice said. "A remembrance. The play does not feed on blood. It feeds on forgetting." Behind him, more figures began to appear, emerging from the fog like a second wave. Their robes were stained, some burned, others still wet with rot. And then he saw something worse. Faces. Not all wore masks. Some were uncovered, frozen in expressions of fear or sadness or something far beyond either. Eyes that did not blink, mouths that did not breathe. Yet they stood upright, as though pulled by strings. He turned back to the lead figure. "What happens if no one offers a name?" he asked, though he feared the answer. "Then the village forgets again, and we begin once more." He stepped forward, heart hammering. "What if I offer mine?" The voice seemed to consider. "Then the sickness will pause, but only for a time. True remembrance must come from the many, not the few." Leonce thought of the villagers, their silence, their superstition. He thought of the boy and of the girl who had whispered about the ones who never died. They were all caught in something they didn't understand, something they had been born into, inherited like a wound. "I don't have the right to speak for them," Leonce admitted, "but I want to understand. I want to remember." The figure took one step closer. The mask loomed only inches away now, expressionless and ancient. "Then you must see." A hand reached out and touched his forehead. The world exploded in light. Images flooded his mind, flashes of fire and ash, of fields filled with corpses, but also of ceremony. Villagers gathered in a circle, a stone altar in the center, hands raised to the sky. A child, offered not in pain, but in reverence. A promise made between man and something unseen. Not a god, not a demon. A presence. The balance. The cycle. Then betrayal. One generation refused. The circle was broken. The altar left to rot. And so the sickness returned, not as punishment, but as reminder. Over and over again, until someone remembered what had been broken. Leon staggered back, breath ragged. The vision faded. The figures were still there, unmoved. "I saw it," he whispered. "You kept your part. We didn't." The lead figure nodded once. "Then remember, and tell them." Leonce looked up. "And if they won't believe me?" The voice echoed again, softer this time. "Then they will forget, and we will return." With that, the fog began to lift. The figures turned, one by one, and stepped back into the woods. The bells grew fainter until they disappeared entirely. Leon stood alone on the path, the forest quiet once more. He turned toward the village. The lantern in his hand still burned. But the real fire, he knew, had only just begun. Leonce's legs felt heavy as he made his way back through the mist-shrouded streets. Every shadow seemed to watch him. Every silent window a pair of eyes waiting for news. News he wasn't sure he had the courage to share. The journal still weighed against his chest, its brittle pages filled with secrets darker than any plague he had ever heard of. Secrets that the villagers might never want to hear. When he reached his home, the boy was sitting by the fire, eyes wide and filled with questions that no words could answer yet. Leonce set the journal on the table, its spiral cover catching the flicker of the flames. For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and uneasy. "They're real," Leonce said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. "The ones from the stories. The ones no one talks about anymore." The boy nodded slowly. "The kept. The forgotten." "Yes," Leonce replied. "And they came for a name given willingly. To keep the balance." The boy swallowed hard. "But what balance? What does it mean?" Leonce looked away. "I don't know all of it yet. But it's not just sickness. It's memory. The plague isn't punishment. It's a reminder of something old, a promise broken long ago." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, and somewhere far off, the faint echo of a bell tolled once more. It was a sound that sent a shiver down his spine, less like a warning, more like a calling. "We have to tell the others," the boy said suddenly, rising to his feet. "They need to know what's coming." Leonce shook his head. "If we do, they'll panic. They'll close their doors and pray. But fear won't stop this." The boy's face fell. "Then what do we do?" Leonce leaned forward, hands clenched on the table. "We remember. We find out what they want and why. And maybe, just maybe, we find a way to break the cycle." His eyes drifted to the journal again. The pages seemed to call to him, pulling him back into the past, into stories that had never been meant to see the light of day. Days passed in a blur of whispers and restless nights. Leonce and the boy pored over the journal, deciphering its cryptic notes and drawings. They found clues buried between the lines, references to rituals, to hidden places beneath the village, to symbols carved in stone and wood. The spiral was everywhere, a mark of unity and division, of healing and forgetting. One entry stood out among the rest. Asterisk, the mask is not protection, but a vessel. It carries the memories we must bear, the pain we refuse to forget. To wear it is to carry the burden of those lost and those yet to come. Asterisk, Leonce traced the words with his finger, feeling a strange kinship with the unknown author. Whoever had written this had lived through horrors beyond imagining, yet still had hope for the future. Hope. That was something the village desperately needed. But as they dug deeper, strange things began to happen. The air grew heavier. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. At night, strange noises echoed from the forest, soft tapping, like fingers drumming on bark, or whispers carried on the wind. Sometimes, Leonce thought he saw figures standing at the edge of the trees, watching, waiting. One evening, as he closed the journal, a sharp knock came at the door. He opened it to find a woman standing there, cloaked and pale, eyes bright with urgency. "I know what you found," she said quickly, stepping inside before he could respond. "And you don't have much time." Leonce narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" "Call me Miriam," she said. "I'm one of the few left who remembers the old ways. The ones who keep the stories alive. I've been watching, waiting for someone like you." He felt a flicker of hope. "Can you help us?" She nodded. "Yes, but it won't be easy. The plague is not just sickness. It's a curse tied to a broken promise. And breaking it means facing truths the village fears." Leonce looked toward the boy, who nodded silently. Miriam pulled a small, worn book from her cloak, older than the journal, bound in faded cloth. "This contains the rituals, the prayers, and the warnings. It's how he survived before, how he might survive again." For the first time in days, Leonce felt a spark of determination. The night stretched on as Miriam shared stories of the past, of healers who wore masks not just to protect, but to carry the memories of the dead, of villages lost to the fog, swallowed whole because they forgot the pact, of a balance that could only be kept when man and spirit walked together. But as dawn approached, Miriam's face grew grim. The ones in the forest, they aren't just memories, she said. They're guardians, protectors of the old promise. If the village refuses to remember, they will come for more than just names. Leonce's heart pounded. More than names. The living, Miriam whispered. Because forgetting is a hunger that grows. The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Outside, the first light of morning was swallowed by thickening fog. The village was still sleeping, but the cycle was far from over. Leonce woke that morning with a heavy weight pressing down on his chest, a feeling he couldn't shake no matter how much he tried. The sun barely pierced the dense fog that still clung to the village, turning the streets into ghostly shapes. Everything felt quieter, but in a way that made the silence louder, like the calm before a storm. He found the boy already awake, sitting by the window, watching the mist swirl around the old church steeple. "They're still out there," the boy said softly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "The kept." Leonce nodded. "I know." The words felt like a whisper against the thick air. Miriam said they're guardians, not just ghosts. Protectors of the old pact. The boy looked over. But why do they want names? Why does it have to be like this? Leonce sighed. Because forgetting breaks the balance. The plague doesn't just kill bodies. It erases stories, memories, the very reason people fight to live. They moved through the village cautiously. The few villagers who ventured outside, casting wary glances, but refusing to speak about what they feared most. The sense of dread was like a shadow that followed them. Leonce wondered how many secretly believed the old tales, but were too scared to admit it. At the market square, they met an old man sitting alone on a bench, hands trembling around a worn cane. He looked up as they approached, his eyes clouded but sharp. "You seek the truth," he said, voice rough as gravel. "But truth is a bitter medicine, harder to swallow than any poison." Leonce sat beside him. "We need to know. The plague is back, and the village can't hide from it anymore." The old man nodded slowly. "I was a child when the last sickness came. I saw the healers in their masks, some brave, some broken. They carried the weight of 100 souls, and some lost themselves along the way." Leonce leaned in. "Did they ever find a way to stop it?" The man's eyes darkened. "No, the cycle never ended. Each time the balance tipped, the plague returned. The kept came with the bells, demanding names, willing names. Without them, the sickness grew stronger. What happens if no one steps forward?" Leonce asked. The old man looked away. "Then the plague takes what it wants. Names become faces. Faces become lost." A chill ran through Leonce's spine. The villagers had long since stopped offering names, refusing to face the fear and guilt tied to the pact. But now it was clear. Their silence was fueling the sickness. As he walked away, Leonce caught a glimpse of a woman watching from her window. Her face was pale, eyes hollow. She turned away quickly, pulling the curtains closed. He wondered how many carried the weight of hidden fears, the stories locked deep inside, unable to speak them aloud. Back at his home, Miriam was waiting. She held the old book tightly, her hands shaking. "We have to act soon," she said. "The plague is rising. The kept grow restless. They want remembrance before the next bell tolls." Leonce looked at the pages spread out before them. Rituals, prayers, symbols meant to connect the living with those lost. But how do we convince the village? They don't want to believe. They fear the past. Miriam's eyes softened. Fear is a powerful silence. But sometimes it takes one voice to break it. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden knocking at the door. Leonce opened it to find a young woman, drenched from the morning mist, eyes wide with terror. "It's my brother," she gasped. "He's sick. Fever, chills, and he's speaking in tongues I don't understand." Leonce exchanged a glance with Miriam. The plague was no longer a distant threat. It had found them. They followed the woman to a small cottage on the village's edge. Inside, a boy lay curled on the floor, his skin pale and clammy. His eyes fluttered, but his voice was low and strange, uttering words that made no sense. Miriam knelt beside him, placing a hand on his forehead. "The sickness isn't just physical," she said quietly. "It's a wound in memory, a tearing between worlds." Leonce watched helplessly as the boy's body convulsed, his breath shallow. He realized that the plague was more than a disease. It was a curse intertwined with the village's past, a reminder that history refused to be forgotten. That night, the village was restless. Doors were bolted tight, fires burned longer, and whispered prayers filled the air. Leonce sat by the fire with the boy, both lost in thought. "We have to find a way to bring the village together," Leonce said, "to face what's coming. Otherwise, this cycle will never end." The boy nodded, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "But how?" "They're too afraid." Leonce stared into the fire. "Sometimes, the hardest truth is the one that saves us." Outside, the fog crept closer, carrying with it the faint tolling of bells. The Kep were coming again, and the village, once more, stood on the edge of forgetting or remembering too late. Leonce barely slept that night. The flickering firelight seemed to cast shadows that moved just beyond the edge of his vision. The boy was restless too, whispering half-formed questions and fears. What were these Kep really? Why did they demand names? And what exactly was the broken promise that chained the village to this endless cycle of plague and fear? Morning came heavy and gray. The village felt different somehow, as if the air itself was thick with unspoken dread. Leonce and Miriam knew they had to act quickly, but convincing the villagers to confront centuries of buried secrets was a task far more difficult than battling any sickness. They decided to visit the village council, a small group of elders who still held some sway. The council met in the old stone hall, its walls covered in faded tapestries that had witnessed generations of decisions. The room was cold and silent as Leonce, Miriam, and the boy entered. The council members looked up, faces lined with worry and skepticism. Leonce cleared his throat. "The plague is not a random sickness. It is tied to the stories we have forgotten, the pact made long ago. The Kep demand remembrance. If we refuse, the sickness will only grow worse." One elder, a stern man with silver hair, shook his head. "We've lived through plague before. We survive, as we always have, by staying apart, by keeping to ourselves. These tales you speak of are old wives' tales." "Superstition." Miriam's voice was calm but firm. "Superstition or not, the evidence is clear. The journal, the rituals, these are real. The masks, the names, they're not just symbols. They're our only chance." Another council member, a woman whose eyes glinted with fear, spoke up. "And what happens if we call out these names? If we remember the past? What if it only makes the plague stronger?" Leonce met her gaze. The plague feeds on silence. It grows in the cracks where memory fades. Naming is not an invitation to sickness. It is a shield against it. The room fell into uneasy silence. The elders exchanged glances, weighing centuries of tradition against the new fear that had taken root. Outside, the fog thickened, curling like smoke around the ancient stone buildings. The distant tolling of bells echoed once again, chilling and urgent. After the meeting, Leonce and Miriam walked slowly back through the village. The boy followed quietly, eyes scanning every shadow. "It's no wonder the village is afraid," Miriam said softly. "They're trapped between what they know and what they refuse to face." Leonce nodded. "Fear makes people close their hearts. But if we don't open them, we'll never break this curse." As they passed the marketplace, a figure stepped from the shadows, a tall man in a dark cloak, face obscured by a hood. He watched them silently before speaking in a voice rough as gravel. "You meddle in things beyond your understanding," he warned. "The Kept are not easily tamed." Leon stood his ground. "We don't want to tame them. We want to understand." The man's eyes glinted. "Understanding comes with a price, one you may not be willing to pay." Without another word, he vanished into the fog. The encounter left a cold knot in Leonce's stomach. Who was this stranger? And what price would they have to pay to end the cycle? Back at his home, Leonce spread the journal and Miriam's book across the table. They began piecing together the rituals that might help, the prayers to call out names safely, the symbols that bound memory and spirit, the steps to honor those lost without inviting more sickness. But as they worked, the boy grew quieter, his gaze distant. "What's wrong?" Leonce asked gently. The boy hesitated. "I think the kept are closer than we thought. Last night, I heard them near the forest. Whisper my name." Leonce's heart clenched. "You've been carrying the memories, just like the mask says." The boy nodded. "But I'm afraid. What if I forget who I am?" Miriam placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Remembering is hard, but forgetting is far worse." As days passed, more villagers fell ill. The sickness spread faster than anyone could stop it, and the fog seemed to creep deeper into every corner. Leonce and Miriam began organizing small gatherings, sharing what they knew about the rituals. Slowly, some villagers started to listen, eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. One evening, during a quiet meeting by the firelight, an elder woman named Annette spoke up. "I remember my grandmother telling stories about the plague doctors, their masks, their sacrifices. She said they carried the memories of the dead so the living wouldn't lose their way." Her voice trembled. "Maybe it's time we stop running from the past and start honoring it." The room filled with murmurs. For the first time in a long time, the village felt a fragile sense of unity. But outside, the kept waited. The tolling bells grew louder, closer. One night, as Leonce and Miriam walked home beneath the thick fog, a chilling sound stopped them, a low, echoing chant carried on the wind. From the shadows emerged ghostly figures, their masks worn and cracked, eyes glowing faintly with otherworldly light. The kept had come. Leonce's breath caught. The cycle was unfolding again, and the village stood at the edge of a choice, to remember and face the truth, or to sink deeper into silence and fear. The story was far from over. The night air was thick and cold as Leonce and Miriam faced the eerie procession of the kept. Their masks, once symbols of protection, now looked like relics from a forgotten nightmare, cracked and worn, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the mist. The silence around them was broken only by the distant tolling of bells and the faint, haunting chant carried on the wind. Leonce's heart pounded in his chest, not just from fear, but from the weight of knowing what was coming next. These spirits, these guardians of the forgotten, were not just there to remind the living. They demanded something in return. Names, memories, truth. Miriam stepped closer, clutching the ancient book tightly. "We have to speak to them," she said in a voice barely louder than a whisper. "The only way to stop this is to face it." The boy, standing a few steps behind them, swallowed hard but nodded. He had seen enough to know the price of ignoring the past. The kept halted a few feet away, their forms shifting in the fog like shadows caught between two worlds. Leonce swallowed the lump in his throat and spoke aloud, his voice trembling but steady. "We remember you. We honor the names you carry. We will not forget." One of the figures stepped forward, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "Names give us power. Without them, we fade. But to speak them aloud risks the sickness." Miriam opened the book, her fingers tracing the faded words of a prayer meant to bridge the living and the dead without harm. Leonce joined her, and together they recited the ancient incantation. The fog around them thickened and swirled, the air charged with a strange energy. Slowly, the glowing eyes of the kept softened, and their forms began to shimmer as if responding to the recognition. "You bear the weight of memory," the lead spirit said. "But memory alone cannot heal what is broken." Leonce asked, "What must we do to break the cycle, to protect the village?" The spirit's voice grew faint, like a fading echo. The pact was made in desperation, a promise to remember, to name, to honor. But the balance was lost when fear silenced the living. Only by embracing the past, by facing the truth of pain and loss, can the sickness be quelled. Miriam looked at Leonce, eyes wide with the burden of understanding. "We have to lead the village in remembrance, to share the stories of those lost and offer their names willingly." The boy stepped forward, voice steady despite his fear. I will start. I carry the names of those forgotten. The Kept's eyes seem to brighten with a faint glow. Then the first step is taken. But before the moment could settle, a sharp, piercing sound shattered the silence. A scream, raw and desperate, echoed from deeper within the village. Leonce's heart skipped. That came from the old mill. They rushed toward the sound, fog swirling thickly around them. At the edge of the village, they found a woman trembling beside a man collapsed on the ground, sweat pouring down his face. "He's the miller," she said between sobs. "Fever. The sickness. It's taken him fast." Miriam knelt to check his pulse. It was weak, fluttering. "We're running out of time," she said grimly. "If we don't act soon, the plague will consume us all." Leonce felt a cold dread settle deep in his bones. The Kept had come for names, for memories, but now the sickness was taking more than just stories. It was stealing lives. Back at his home, Leonce, Miriam, and the boy gathered the village again. The weight of the recent event hung heavily in the air. "We cannot ignore this any longer," Leonce told them. "The plague is not just a disease. It is a symptom of our silence, our fear." The Kept demand remembrance. They demand names. An old woman stood, voice trembling but resolute. "Then let us speak. Let us remember those we lost, so the sickness might find no home here." One by one, the villagers began to share names. Fathers, mothers, children taken by past plagues, their stories weaving together in the flickering firelight. The act of naming felt like a release, a balm on years of hidden pain. Outside, the fog seemed to retreat, and the tolling bells softened. But deep inside, Leonce knew this was only the beginning. The past could not be undone, and the future was uncertain. The Kept would watch and wait, their eyes on the village, their presence a constant reminder that forgetting was never an option. As the first light of dawn broke through the mist, a new question lingered in the air. Could the village truly break the cycle, or were they doomed to repeat the same story forever? The dawn light filtered weakly through the thick fog, casting long, gray shadows across the village streets. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and smoke from small fires burning in hearths, trying to stave off the morning chill. But beneath this quiet, something had shifted. The villagers moved differently now, more solemn, more thoughtful. The names spoken the night before still echoed in their hearts, stirring memories both painful and precious. Leonce sat by the flickering fire in his small home, watching the boy carefully trace patterns in the dust on the wooden floor. The boy's eyes held a depth far beyond his years, and Leonce wondered how much of the old stories had already settled into that young mind. The weight of carrying names, memories, and a burden no child should bear was heavy. Miriam entered quietly, holding a bundle of dried herbs and worn cloth strips, the remnants of the masks plague doctors once wore. She knelt beside Leonce, her voice soft. "We need to prepare. The sickness is still here, and the Kept are restless." Leonce nodded. "If the village is to survive, we must do more than remember. We must act." Miriam's gaze grew distant as she pulled a faded parchment from her bag. "These are the instructions I found in the old manuscript. Rituals to bind memory and spirit, to protect the living from the curse of silence." Leonce reached for the parchment, feeling the brittle paper crumble slightly under his fingers. The words were faded, but their meaning was clear. To honor the dead, the living must gather, share stories aloud, and offer gifts symbolizing remembrance and respect. These acts, done together, would form a shield, a barrier against the plague's grip. The boy looked up, eyes searching. "Will it work?" Leonce hesitated. "It has to. There is no other way." Outside, the village was stirring. Word had spread of the gathering plan for that evening, a coming together unlike any before. Some villagers were eager, others hesitant, but all knew that the path forward demanded courage. As the day wore on, Leonce and Miriam moved among the people, helping prepare the meeting place, the old chapel at the village center. It was a humble stone building, worn by time and weather, but inside, it would hold the weight of new hope. Families brought tokens, worn tools, faded portraits, simple trinkets once held by those lost. These were placed on makeshift altars, surrounded by candles that flickered like fragile stars. The air filled with whispered prayers and quiet tears. When night fell, the villagers gathered, faces illuminated by candlelight, shadows dancing on the stone walls. Leon stepped forward, heart pounding, and began to speak. We gather tonight to remember, to call out the names of those taken before us, and to honor their stories. In this we find strength, not just to fight the sickness, but to heal. One by one, voices rose, soft at first, then stronger. Names flowed like a river, some familiar, some nearly forgotten. Each name a thread weaving the community tighter together, binding past and present. The boy stood at Leonce's side, his small voice carrying a long list of names from the journal. The lost children, the healers, the brave souls who had worn the plague doctor's mask before him. As the ritual continued, a strange warmth seemed to settle over the chapel. The heavy fog outside thinned, and the tolling of bells slowed to a gentle rhythm. But just as hope began to take root, a sudden chill swept through the room. The candles flickered violently, shadows stretched unnaturally, and the air grew thick with tension. A low murmur rose from the crowd, unease rippling through the villagers. The boy shivered, clutching Leonce's hand tightly. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked, face hidden beneath a cracked mask reminiscent of the plague, doctor's bird-like beak. The silence that followed was deep and suffocating. Leonce's breath caught. The kept had returned, not as whispers or shadows, but as a presence undeniable and terrifying. The figure raised a hand, and the chanting began anew. Ancient words spoken in a voice both distant and near, calling to forgotten promises, reminding the living of debts unpaid. The villagers froze, caught between fear and the pull of remembrance. Leonce stepped forward, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. We remember. We honor. We will pay what is owed. The figure's eyes gleamed behind a mask. Then you walk the path of truth, but the price will be great. Miriam whispered urgently. The balance must be restored. We must be ready. Outside, the fog deepened once more, swallowing the village in its cold embrace. Leonce knew the days ahead would test everything. Faith, courage, and the fragile threads holding the community together. The story was far from over. The plague, the kept, and the shadows of the past awaited their reckoning. And the question lingered in the cold night air. Would the village find peace or be swallowed once again by the sickness born of silence and fear? The chill in the air lingered long after the cloaked figure disappeared into the shadows. The villagers stood motionless, the weight of what had just happened settling heavily on their shoulders. Some clutched each other tightly, seeking comfort, while others stared wide-eyed at the fading mist outside the chapel's windows. The flickering candles seemed suddenly fragile, their warm glow no match for the creeping cold that had seeped inside. Leonce took a deep breath, steadying himself. He glanced at Miriam and the boy, who looked pale but determined. The moment of unity, the ritual of remembrance, had drawn the kept out of the fog like never before. It was as if speaking the names had broken a seal, but instead of peace, it had unleashed a new kind of unrest. We must prepare, Miriam said quietly. The kept are not merely spirits. They are guardians of a promise. If we fail them, the plague will grow stronger. Leonce nodded. But how? We've named the dead, shared their stories. We've opened a door. What else can we do? Miriam pulled out another fragment of the manuscript, pages brittle and stained. There are rituals, yes. But more than that, there are truths we must face. The plague is not just illness. It is punishment for silence, for forgotten promises. We need to confront the root, the reason this curse lingers. The boy stepped closer, eyes shining in the dim light. Then we have to learn everything about the past, about the pact, about the plague doctors. They weren't just healers. They were part of something larger, something no one talks about. Leonce realized the boy was right. The history they had brushed aside as boring or irrelevant held keys to survival. The plague doctors have been feared, misunderstood, but maybe their story held secrets to breaking the cycle. Outside the chapel, the village was restless. Families whispered behind closed doors, afraid to sleep, afraid to forget. The fog clung to the streets like a shroud, thick and unyielding. Children were kept inside, and farmers delayed their daily work, watching the horizon anxiously. Leonce and Miriam decided to visit the old apothecary, an ancient stone building at the edge of the village where herbs, potions, and old remedies were stored. The apothecary's caretaker, an elderly woman named Greta, was known for her knowledge of both plants and stories. Greta welcomed them with a knowing look. "You've stirred the kept," she said softly, her voice as weathered as the village itself. "That's no small thing." Leonce explained the night's events, the ritual, the appearance of the cloaked figure, and the urgency to understand the plague doctor's true role. Greta nodded slowly. The plague doctors wore their masks not just to protect themselves from disease, but to hide from something darker. They were part of a secret order sworn to guard the pact between the living and the dead. The bird-like beak was filled with herbs and spices meant to keep away more than just sickness. It was meant to keep away the curse. Miriam's eyes widened. A curse. Greta's gaze dropped to her hands. Yes, the sickness is a symptom of a broken promise, a pact made long ago when the first plague swept through the land. The plague doctors tried to keep the balance, but fear and silence shattered the bond. The kept are the reminders, the enforcers. Leonce felt a shiver run down his spine. The plague was more than a disease. It was a living consequence of broken trust. "We have to find the original pact," Leonce said. "If we can restore it, maybe we can stop the plague." Greta hesitated, then reached under the counter, pulling out a small, locked chest. "This contains the records of the order, fragments of the pact, and rituals meant to renew it. But be warned, seeking the truth will not be easy, and it may cost more than you expect." That evening, back at Leonce's home, the three of them gathered around the chest. The boy's fingers trembled as he helped unlock it. Inside lay brittle scrolls, faded ink, and strange symbols. Miriam carefully unfolded one of the parchments. The text spoke of an ancient ritual, a ceremony meant to be performed every decade to renew the pact and keep the sickness at bay. It required three things: remembrance, sacrifice, and confession. The living had to remember the dead, offer a meaningful sacrifice to honor their memory, and confess the community's collective faults, acknowledging the fear and silence that had allowed the plague to grow. Leonce looked up, his mind racing. "We've done the remembrance. But sacrifice and confession, that's going to be harder." Miriam nodded. "Sacrifice doesn't necessarily mean death. It could be giving something precious, something symbolic. But confession, that means facing the truth, admitting what the village has hidden for so long." The boy looked troubled. What secrets could be so dark that the village wouldn't even talk about them? Leonce sighed. "Maybe it's time we find out." Days passed, and the village buzzed with unease. The fog grew thicker each morning, and whispers spread like wildfire. Some villagers resisted the idea of confession, unwilling to expose old wounds or blame. Others feared the sacrifice, uncertain what it might demand. Leonce, Miriam, and the boy worked tirelessly, gathering stories and encouraging openness. Slowly, the village began to open up. Long-buried grudges, shameful mistakes, and forgotten kindnesses came to light. The act of confession was painful but necessary. One night, as the villagers gathered once more in the chapel, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. They prepared to perform the ceremony, offering tokens of sacrifice, simple things like a handcrafted bowl, a lock of hair, or a cherished keepsake. Each gift was accepted with solemn gratitude, a bridge between past and present. As the ritual began, the air shifted. The kept appeared again, their glowing eyes no longer threatening but watchful. The villagers spoke aloud their confessions, their fears, their failings, their hopes. The boy stepped forward, voice steady, speaking for those who could not. The fog outside thinned, and for a moment, peace seemed within reach. But as the final words echoed through the chapel, a sudden, eerie silence fell. The candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. A cold wind swept through, carrying a whisper that chilled every spine. The pact is not yet whole. Leonce felt a cold hand grip his heart. The village's journey was far from over. The sickness, the kept, the ancient curse, they all waited for what came next. And in the shadows beyond the chapel, something unseen watched, patient and unforgiving. The story was still unfolding, and the price of silence remained a threat none could yet fully understand. The chapel remained shrouded in darkness long after the candles died out, leaving the villagers huddled together in a silence so thick it pressed on their lungs. The air was cold, unnatural, as if the warmth had been sucked away by unseen fingers. Leonce's heart pounded, each beat echoing the dread creeping through the room. No one dared to speak, but every eye flickered toward the shadows, waiting for something to emerge. Outside, the fog had rolled back in, heavier than before, swallowing the village's narrow streets and homes in a damp, suffocating blanket. It seemed as if the plague itself had risen, not just as sickness, but as a living, breathing darkness that refused to be banished. They kept those ghostly figures tied to the plague, doctor's curse, now felt closer, their presence undeniable. Miriam's voice finally broke the silence. "The pact is incomplete," she whispered, her words trembling but firm. "We've confessed, we've sacrificed, but there's something missing, something we haven't faced." Leonce swallowed hard. What could it be? "We've done everything the scrolls said." "The scrolls don't tell the whole story," Miriam answered. "They hint at a betrayal. Someone among the plague doctors who broke the promise, who unleashed this curse in the first place." The boy looked up sharply. "A traitor? You mean this curse was started from within? Someone who should have protected us, but didn't?" Miriam nodded grimly. "Yes, and until we find that truth, the plague will keep spreading, and the kept will keep haunting us." The weight of those words settled over the group like a storm cloud. The villagers' faces showed a mix of fear and disbelief. To imagine that the protectors were also the betrayers was almost too much to bear. Leonce clenched his fists. "Then we have to find out who. We can't let this curse keep destroying us." Miriam unfolded another fragile page from the chest. It was a crude map, marked with symbols and locations tied to the plague doctor's order. Places they had long forgotten, hidden deep in the surrounding woods and abandoned ruins. "We need to go there," Miriam said. "The answers are buried in the past, and only by facing them can we hope to end this." The boy nodded, determination sparking in his eyes. "I'll go with you. We need to do this before it's too late." Leonce hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "We'll leave at first light." That night, the village lay restless. Some stayed awake, staring out at the foggy streets, waiting for what might come next. Others tried to sleep, but found the memories of the plague too sharp, the whispers of the kept too loud. Fear was a living thing, feeding on silence and uncertainty. As dawn broke, the trio set out toward the ancient sites marked on the map. The woods were dense, the air heavy with decay and the scent of damp earth. Every step seemed to echo with history, with secrets waiting to be uncovered. Shadows moved just beyond sight, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. At the first marked location, a crumbling stone tower overgrown with vines, they found signs of old rituals, ashes, broken pottery, and faded inscriptions carved into the rock. But there was more. Deep inside the tower, hidden beneath loose stones, was a small wooden box sealed tight. Leonce's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside lay a letter, yellowed and fragile, written in a hurried, nearly illegible script. The words spoke of fear, guilt, and a desperate attempt to hide the truth about the curse. It named a plague doctor, once respected, now reviled, who had betrayed the order by breaking the pact, condemning the village to endless suffering. Miriam's eyes darkened. This is what we needed. Proof. But it also means the curse was no accident. The boy's voice was barely a whisper. If one betrayed the pact, could there be others? Is the curse still alive in someone today? Their journey led them deeper into the woods, to ruins where the order once gathered. The air grew colder, and strange noises echoed around them. Whispers carried by the wind, footsteps where no one should be. At one point, the boy stumbled, dropping the letter. When he bent to pick it up, his eyes caught movement behind the trees. A figure cloaked in shadow watched them, silent, unmoving. For a moment, they all froze, hearts racing. But when they looked again, the figure was gone. The creeping dread returned with a vengeance. Whatever haunted these woods was aware of them now. The kept were not just spirits of the dead. They were sentinels, guarding the secret from discovery. As they pressed forward, Miriam's voice was steady but low. The betrayal cut deep. It wasn't just a broken promise. It was an act meant to destroy the village and the order itself. Whoever did this wanted to silence us. Leon swallowed his fear. Then we're walking into a trap. But we have no choice. Their final destination was a forgotten chapel, hidden beneath layers of earth and moss. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and old incense. The walls bore carvings of plague doctors, their faces hidden behind the iconic beaked masks, eyes hollow and watchful. In the center lay a stone altar, cracked and stained. On it, a bundle of old parchment tied with a faded red ribbon. Miriam carefully untied it, revealing a detailed confession, written by the betrayer themselves. The words told of jealousy, fear, and a dark ambition to control the plague rather than cure it. The betrayal was personal, fueled by resentment against the order's leaders and a twisted belief that the curse could be used as power. As Leonce read aloud, the temperature in the chapel seemed to drop. Shadows shifted along the walls, and the kept appeared, their eyes glowing brighter than ever. The boy stepped back, voice shaking. They know we found it. They want to stop us. Miriam nodded. We've uncovered the truth, but now we have to survive long enough to share it. The weight of the revelation pressed down on them like a physical force. The betrayal was the root of the plague's curse, but unearthing it had awakened something dangerous. Outside, the fog thickened, swirling like a living thing ready to consume. The kept closed in, their silent vigil turning to something more menacing. Leonce looked to Miriam and the boy. We have the truth, but the fight is just beginning. We have to get back to the village. The path back was a race against time and shadows, every step haunted by unseen eyes and whispered threats. As the chapel door slammed shut behind them, the question lingered in the air. Would the village survive the truth, or would the curse claim them all? The journey back to the village felt heavier than the trek into the woods. The weight of the betrayal they had uncovered pressed on their minds, twisting their thoughts and deepening their fear. Leonce glanced over at Miriam, who walked with her eyes fixed ahead, the map clutched tightly in her hand. The boy, usually full of restless energy, was quiet, his gaze darting nervously at every shifting shadow. They knew the kept weren't just lingering spirits anymore. They were something more, guardians of a terrible secret, or maybe punishers for uncovering it. The forest seemed alive with their presence. Whispers floated on the wind, footsteps echoed just behind them, and the chilling sensation of eyes watching from the dark gnawed at their resolve. Every step felt like a gamble, as if the earth itself might open beneath their feet to swallow them whole. The broken letter from the chapel haunted Leonce's mind. The plague doctor's betrayal wasn't just a tragic mistake. It was a deliberate act, one born from anger and a hunger for control that shattered their community's hope. If the curse had been weaponized by someone among their own, then trust was broken beyond repair. Miriam broke the silence, her voice steady but low. We can't tell anyone everything yet. The village isn't ready. There are those who would turn against us, blame the plague doctors for everything. Leonce frowned. But if we don't warn them, they'll keep suffering. The plague will keep spreading. That's why we have to be careful, Miriam said. The truth is dangerous. Sometimes it can be worse than the disease. The boy looked up, eyes wide with uncertainty. But hiding it doesn't stop the plague, does it? It just lets it keep hurting people. Leonce nodded slowly. He's right. We need a plan. Something to protect the village and expose the truth at the same time. As they neared the village outskirts, the fog began to thin, but the tension didn't lift. The houses stood silent and empty, doors barred, windows shuttered. No children's laughter, no footsteps on the cobblestones. Only the thick, heavy quiet of fear. A shadow moved in an alleyway nearby, and the boy jumped. "Did you see that?" Miriam squinted into the gloom. "Probably just a stray animal. But stay alert." They stepped carefully, hearts pounding, until they reached the town square. It looked like a ghost town. A small fire flickered in the hearth of the inn, but no one answered their knocks. Leonce's stomach twisted. The plague had taken more than lives. It had stolen their community's spirit. Inside the inn, old newspapers and scattered notes told stories of the growing sickness, of fear turning neighbors into strangers. The local healer had vanished weeks ago. Rumors whispered of her fleeing into the woods or worse. Whispers of a curse spread like wildfire, fueling superstition and mistrust. Leon sank onto a broken chair. "We need to find someone to trust, someone who can help." Miriam nodded. "The village council is divided. Some want to deny the plague entirely. Others want to blame the doctors. If we tell them about the betrayal, it could ignite a war among them." The boy shivered. "So what do we do? How do we stop the plague and keep everyone from tearing each other apart?" Before Miriam could answer, a sudden knock came from the back door. Everyone froze. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a thin figure wrapped in a tattered cloak. It was Elias, the village elder, a man few had seen recently. His eyes were tired but sharp. "You found the truth," he said quietly. "I knew someone would, but the cost will be high." Leon stood. "Elias, we need your help. We have proof that the plague doctor's order was betrayed from within. The curse isn't natural." The elder nodded slowly. "I've heard whispers for years, but I feared the truth would destroy what little hope remains. They kept our restless because justice was never served." Miriam stepped forward. "Then what do we do? How do we fix this?" Elias looked out a grimy window at the fog still rolling in. "There's an old ritual, one buried in the order's darkest days. It might break the curse, but it requires a sacrifice, more than anyone here is willing to pay." The boy swallowed hard. "What kind of sacrifice?" Elias hesitated. "A life. A soul bound to the plague itself. Someone must face the darkness head-on, and it will change them forever." Leonce felt the room tighten around him. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about fighting a disease. It was about confronting something ancient and evil that had taken root in their lives. Miriam's voice was steady but somber. "We have no choice. If we want to save the village, we must be ready to pay that price." The boy looked between them, fear and resolve mixing in his eyes. "Then I'll do it. I'm ready." Leonce's heart clenched. "No, we all have to be ready. This isn't a game." Elias nodded slowly. "The ritual is dangerous, and the curse fights back. Many who tried before were lost, swallowed by the darkness. You will face your worst fears." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the village seemed to hold its breath. The plague wasn't just a sickness anymore. It was a living nightmare, twisting lives and testing the limits of hope and courage. Leonce, Miriam, and the boy prepared for a journey unlike any before. They would face the shadows of the past, the betrayal that had cursed their people, and the terrifying unknown waiting in the heart of the plague itself. The night deepened, and the village's fate hung in the balance. Would they break the curse, or would the darkness consume them all? Only time would tell. The fire in the inn's hearth flickered low, casting long shadows that danced eerily on the cracked walls. Leonce sat close to the embers, his mind racing with the weight of Elias's words. The thought of a ritual demanding a sacrifice, something so final and terrifying, felt like a heavy stone pressing against his chest. Yet, beneath the fear, there was a flicker of determination. This was their only chance. Miriam moved quietly across the room, unpacking a small satchel filled with worn parchments and ancient symbols she'd found in the old records of the plague doctors. "The order kept secrets," she said softly, "things they never wanted the world to know. The plague wasn't just illness. It was tied to something darker, something they tried to contain, but ultimately failed. Leonce looked up. You really believe this ritual can end the curse? She nodded, her eyes reflecting both hope and dread. It's all we have. The notes speak of a binding spell, one that could trap the plague's source again. But the cost is high. The ritual demands a soul willing to confront the darkness alone. The boy shivered, wrapping his thin cloak tighter. I'm scared, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. But if this is what it takes, I want to help. Leonce felt a pang of protectiveness mixed with guilt. This boy had already lost so much. Could he bear such a burden? You don't have to do this alone, he said firmly. We'll stand with you every step of the way. Outside, the fog thickened, creeping along the village streets like a living thing. The chill in the air seeped into their bones, as if warning them the night was far from over. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, its mournful sound echoing through the empty lanes. Elias cleared his throat, breaking the silence. The ritual must be performed where the plague first took hold. That place is no longer safe. The kept guard it fiercely, and they do not forgive trespassers. Leon swallowed hard. Then we'll need a plan. We can't just walk into the heart of darkness without some protection. Miriam pulled a small vial from her bag, a mixture of herbs, dried flowers, and strange powders. This is a concoction used by the earliest plague doctors. It won't stop the plague, but it might shield us long enough to perform the ritual. The room fell silent again, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down like the thick fog outside. The village's future depended on their courage and the strength to face horrors no one else dared confront. The boy looked up suddenly, his eyes shining with a fierce light. What if the curse fights back? What if it's stronger than we think? Leonce nodded slowly. It will fight, but fear won't stop us. We have to believe there's something worth saving. That night, as the village slept under a blanket of mist, the three prepared. Each had their own fears, memories of loss, shadows of doubt, and the gnawing uncertainty of what awaited them beyond the village's fragile safety. Leonce thought of his family, long gone to the plague. Miriam remembered the faces of those she couldn't save. And the boy, though young, carried a quiet strength born of surviving the unspeakable. At dawn, the sky was a pale wash of gray. The fog began to lift slowly, revealing the twisted silhouettes of dead trees marking the edge of the cursed woods. Beyond them lay the abandoned chapel where the plague had first struck, the place Elias called the heart of the darkness. Stepping into the forest felt like crossing into another world. The air was heavy with decay and silence, broken only by the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. The kept seemed to watch from every shadow, their unseen eyes following, waiting. Miriam led the way, holding the ancient map steady despite the shaking of her hands. If we can reach the chapel before nightfall, we might still have time. Leonce glanced at the boy, who carried a small satchel of supplies, his jaw clenched in determination. Stay close, he whispered. And remember, the ritual only works if we stay true to our purpose. They moved deeper into the forest, the trees closing around them like sentinels guarding secrets no one was meant to uncover. The path grew narrower, twisted, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Suddenly, a low, rasping sound echoed through the trees. The boy froze, eyes wide with terror. Did you hear that? Leonce raised a hand to hush him. It's the kept. Stay calm. The sound grew louder, a mix of whispers and something more guttural, like the breath of something not quite human. Shadows shifted, and for a moment, dark figures appeared between the trees before vanishing into the fog. Miriam's voice was barely audible. We're not alone. The three pressed on, hearts pounding. The forest seemed to close in, the air thick with menace. Every step felt like walking on a knife's edge between hope and despair. Finally, the chapel appeared, an ancient ruin, half swallowed by vines and moss. Its stone walls were cracked and blackened, windows shattered and empty like hollow eyes. The air around it seemed colder, heavier, as if the plague itself still lingered in the stones. Elias's words echoed in Leonce's mind. They kept guard this place fiercely. They weren't just spirits. They were the angry remnants of betrayal, the plague doctors who had fallen to darkness themselves. Miriam pulled out the ritual scrolls, spreading them carefully on a flat stone. We'll need to perform the binding here, at the source. But once we start, there's no turning back. Leonce looked at the boy. Are you ready? The boy nodded, swallowing hard but standing tall. I have to be. The ritual began with chanting, ancient words trembling on Miriam's lips, while Leonce and the boy held the protective herbs and talismans close. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the wind whispering secrets in a language older than time. But then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward, draped in tattered robes, eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. The Kep had arrived. The air crackled with tension. The ground beneath him trembled. The darkness was waking. Leonce tightened his grip on the boy's arm. The moment of truth was upon them, and the fate of the village hung in the balance. What would the Kep do? Could the ritual succeed? Or was this the beginning of an even deeper nightmare? The forest waited, silent but alive, ready to decide their fate. The figure in the tattered robes moved closer, its steps silent but heavy with a presence that chilled the very air. Its glowing eyes locked onto the trio, burning with a cold intelligence that spoke of centuries trapped between life and death. The Kept had come not just to watch, but to challenge, to protect the dark secret buried beneath the ruined chapel at any cost. Leonce tightened his grip on the boy's arm, feeling the tremble in the young shoulders beside him. The herbs Miriam carried seemed almost powerless against the raw, unnatural force before them. His heart pounded as fear and resolve battled within him. This was no longer a simple fight against disease or superstition. It was a confrontation with something far older and more merciless. Miriam's voice faltered for a moment, but steadied as she raised the scroll higher. "We don't want to harm you," she said softly, trying to reach whatever humanity might linger in those eyes. "But we must bind this curse. The plague has taken enough." The figure's lips, if they could be called that, parted in a soundless hiss, a chilling echo that seemed to seep into the very stones. It gestured slowly with a bony hand toward the chapel's crumbling altar. The shadows behind it shifted, revealing more forms, twisted and broken, yet fiercely alive. The Kept surrounded them now, guardians of a nightmare no one else dared face. Leonce stepped forward, swallowing the lump in his throat. "We carry no weapons, only hope," he said. "If there is any mercy left in this place, let's pass." For a heartbeat, the silence was complete. Then the figure nodded once, slowly, deliberately, and turned to the altar. Its followers receded into the mist, leaving an uneasy stillness that pressed down on them like a weight. Miriam exhaled sharply, her hands trembling as she resumed the ritual. The scrolls glowed faintly in the dim light, ancient symbols pulsing with a strange energy. She began to chant again, her voice rising in a steady, rhythmic cadence that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the forest. The boy closed his eyes, clutching the satchel tightly. He whispered a prayer learned from his grandmother, a lullaby that once brought comfort in the darkest times. Leonce could see the determination etched into his young face. This was no longer just survival. It was a fight for their future. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shuddered. The chapel walls groaned as if waking from a long sleep. Vines writhed like serpents, creeping over the stones with unnatural speed. The Kept watched silently from the shadows, their eyes flickering with warning. Leonce's breath caught as a cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it the faint scent of rot and something far worse. The plague's source was stirring, something buried beneath the earth, something waiting to break free. Miriam's chanting grew louder, more urgent. The scrolls flared with light, casting eerie shadows on the twisted trees. The boy stepped closer to the altar, his voice joining hers in a whispered incantation that seemed to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Then, without warning, the earth cracked open at their feet. A dark, viscous mist poured forth, swirling and twisting like a living thing. It coiled around the altar, reaching out with tendrils that sought to choke the light from the ritual. Leon stumbled back, heart pounding. The kept raised their voices in a haunting chorus, a sound that cut through the air like a blade. The forest seemed to close in tighter, the darkness thickening like a suffocating shroud. The boy stood firm, chanting with a courage that defied his years. Miriam's hands moved frantically over the scrolls, tracing symbols that glowed brighter with each word. Leonce felt a strange warmth in his chest, a flicker of hope amidst the encroaching nightmare. But then, the mist surged forward, striking the boy like a wave. He gasped, collapsing to his knees, eyes wide with pain and fear. Leonce rushed to his side, fighting against the cold that threatened to drag the boy under. Miriam's voice faltered. "Keep going," she urged, tears streaming down her face. "The ritual, it has to finish." With every ounce of strength left, Leonce helped the boy rise. Together, they pushed back against the dark fog, their voices rising in desperate unison. The kept watched silently, their presence both a warning and a shield. The chapel's altar began to glow with a fierce light, pushing the mist back inch by inch. The forest held its breath as the balance shifted, the ancient power of the ritual clashing with the primal force of the plague's curse. But just as the mist began to retreat, a sudden, terrible sound shattered the moment. A scream, raw and filled with agony, echoing from deep within the forest. The kept turned as one, their eyes blazing with fury. Leonce looked toward the sound, dread pooling in his stomach. Something else had awakened, drawn by the ritual's power. The fight was far from over. The boy gripped Leonce's arm tightly. "What was that?" Leonce shook his head, voice low. "I don't know, but we need to finish before it reaches us." Miriam gathered her strength, chanting louder, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. The altar's glow intensified, a beacon in the dark woods. The shadows writhed, the forest alive with unseen threats. They kept formed a protective circle, their ancient duty binding them to the trio's fate. Outside, the village lay silent, unaware that the final battle between light and darkness was unfolding just beyond the trees. The plague's shadow still loomed, its secrets buried beneath the earth, waiting. Leon swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the altar. The ritual was their only hope, but the cost was yet unknown. The night had just begun, and the darkness was far from defeated. As the altar's light grew fiercer, casting long, flickering shadows across the twisted trees, an unexpected chill ran through the clearing. Leonce's eyes darted around nervously, sensing something was wrong. The mist, which they had been pushing back with the ritual's power, began to pulse and shift, not retreating anymore, but gathering itself into a dense, swirling mass. Then, without warning, the boy stumbled and fell, his breath catching in his throat. Leonce lunged forward, catching him just in time. The boy's eyes, wide with terror, met Leonce's, and in that moment, the truth hit him like a blow. The boy was changing. His skin began to pale unnaturally, and a faint, sickly glow seemed to rise from within, as if the plague's dark curse was seeping into his very soul. Miriam's chanting faltered as she noticed the change, her hands trembling over the scrolls. "This isn't just any child," she whispered urgently. "He carries the plague's mark, a living vessel." Leonce's heart pounded louder than ever. They had thought the boy was their hope, the last piece of the puzzle to end this nightmare. But now it seemed he was the plague's new beginning, the very source they had sought to destroy. The realization twisted the fear and desperation inside him into something colder, sharper. The kept, once silent observers, stepped forward, their glowing eyes narrowing. "The vessel must not live," one of them intoned in a voice like rustling leaves, "or all will be lost." The group's fragile unity shattered as the kept moved to seize the boy, but Miriam held up her hands fiercely. "No, we protect the boy. The ritual must complete, or the curse will spread beyond the forest, beyond the village." A tense standoff unfolded beneath the ancient trees, the night alive with the crackling energy of a battle not just for survival, but for the very soul of humanity. The boys' weakening breaths mingled with the chant, the forest holding its breath as the dark forces closed in. Leonce felt the weight of every moment pressing down on him. The plague had never been just a disease. It was a living curse, and now it had found a host. The stakes had risen beyond anything they imagined. What would happen if the boy succumbed completely? Could the ritual save him? Or was this the beginning of an even darker chapter? As the shadows deepened and the mist clawed closer, the line between hope and despair blurred. The night was far from over, and the final act was still unwritten. The cold night air seemed to press heavier on Leonce's chest as he knelt beside the boy. The sickly glow pulsing faintly from the child's skin was no longer just a sign of illness. It was something far more sinister, something that made the hairs on the back of Leonce's neck stand on end. He could see clearly now. The boy was not just infected. He was transforming, becoming something between life and death, a walking link to the plague's dark heart. Miriam's voice trembled, barely audible over the eerie stillness of the forest. The scrolls speak of this, a vessel chosen by the plague itself. They say it's a curse passed down by the very earth, a living beacon for the sickness. Her eyes darted nervously to the kept surrounding them, their glowing eyes reflecting the flickering altar light like watchful predators. Leonce's mind raced. They had come seeking to end the plague, but now the plague had taken something vital from them. If the boy becomes the vessel, then the plague spreads beyond the forest, he said, his voice low but steady. It could infect every village, every town. No one would be safe. One of the kept stepped forward, the shadows clinging to its tattered cloak as it spoke with quiet authority. The vessel must be severed from the curse. If the child succumbs, the forest will fall into eternal darkness. We guard this secret for a reason. Miriam shook her head, clutching the scrolls tighter. There's another way. The ritual can purify the vessel if it is completed, but it will require sacrifice, something more than we have offered before. Leonce glanced around, his gaze settling on the altar that pulsed with otherworldly light. The forest seemed to lean in closer, branches creaking as if whispering ancient warnings. The tension thickened, an invisible weight that pressed against their every breath. Suddenly, the mist surged again, swirling faster and darker, as if sensing the rising stakes. The kept raised their voices in a low, haunting chant, a sound that cut through the night like a blade. It wasn't just a song, it was a battle cry against the plague's relentless hunger. The boy's breathing grew shallow, each gasp sounding like a battle fought on the edge of oblivion. Leonce gripped his arm tightly, fighting back the despair threatening to overtake him. Miriam began chanting louder, tracing glowing symbols over the altar's ancient stone, her voice strong despite the fear in her eyes. Then the earth beneath them trembled violently. From the cracking soil, gnarled roots erupted, twisting like serpents toward the altar. The forest came alive in a terrifying display of raw power. The kept scattered, joining the chant with renewed intensity as the roots began to writhe and coil around the altar, trying to choke the light from within. Leonce felt the cold touch of the plague's curse brush against his skin, a whisper of death that promised oblivion if they failed. He looked down at the boy, fragile, scared but still fighting. The vessel was not just a symbol of doom, but also a chance for salvation. Miriam's chanting reached a fevered pitch, the scrolls radiating an intense light that cut through the darkness like a sword. The roots writhed and snapped, but the light held firm, pushing back the creeping shadows. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the forest. The altar's light flickered, and the boy cried out, eyes wide with pain. Leonce caught him just before he collapsed, sweat beading on the child's pale forehead. We're losing the light, Miriam gasped. If the ritual fails, everything we fight for will be lost. Leonce's heart pounded as he looked around the clearing. The Kep's faces were grim, their ancient duty clear: protect the balance or perish trying. The plague was not just a disease of the body, but a battle for the very soul of the land. Then, from the deepest shadows, a figure stepped forward, different from the others. Clad in robes darker than the night itself, its eyes burning with an unnatural fire. The figure's voice was cold, sharp as a blade. "You meddle in forces beyond your understanding," it said. "The vessel is the plague's chosen. To destroy it is to destroy the cycle. But to accept it is to control it." Leonce's breath caught. This was not just a guardian of the plague. This was its master, the shadow that had been pulling the strings all along. The stakes had risen beyond survival. Now there was a war for control, for the future of every living soul. Miriam stepped forward, defiance burning in her eyes. "We will not bow to darkness. The plague may choose, but we decide." The figure laughed, a sound like dry leaves in the wind. "Then prepare for the price." The roots tightened, the altar's light flickered once more, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The battle was no longer just for the boy or even the village. It was for the very essence of life and death. Leonce tightened his grip on the boy, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on them all. The night was far from over, and the final confrontation was drawing near. What sacrifice would be demanded? And would hope be enough to turn back the darkness? The answers lay buried in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The forest seemed to close in tighter with every breath Leonce took, the air thick with tension and the weight of unseen forces pressing down on them. The altar's light flickered, struggling against the tightening grasp of the writhing roots, and the boy's fragile body trembled in his arms. Time had become fluid, a stretch of moments drawn out by fear and hope colliding in a brutal dance. Miriam's voice rose above the cacophony, chanting the ancient words with fierce determination. The scrolls glowed with an intensity that pushed back the darkness, momentarily halting the roots' advance. Yet the shadowy figure in the dark robes, the master of this cursed plague, stepped closer, eyes blazing with an eerie fire. It was clear this was no ordinary enemy. They wielded power that twisted life itself. Leonce swallowed his fear, his grip tightening on the boy. This child was not just a vessel of plague, but a symbol of humanity's fragile fight against destruction. He couldn't let the darkness claim him, not without a fight. Suddenly, Miriam's chant reached a crescendo. The altar's light flared to life, casting sharp beams that sliced through the mist and shadows. The roots writhed and snapped violently, retreating as if burned by the purity of the light. The shadowed figure hissed, recoiling but not defeated. In a desperate move, Leonce stepped forward, holding the boy aloft toward the altar. "You will not win," he declared, voice steady despite the chaos. "This ends here." Miriam placed her hands on the boy's chest, the glow from the scrolls intensifying, and a wave of warmth spread from the altar, flooding the clearing. The sickly light on the boy's skin began to fade, replaced by a soft, healthy glow. The plague's curse was breaking, at least for now, but the shadowed figure's laughter cut through the moment, chilling and sharp. "You think this is the end?" it sneered. "The plague is eternal." The vessel was only the beginning. Before anyone could react, the ground trembled violently, and a hidden fissure cracked open near the altar. From its depths, a dark mist erupted, swirling around the figure, who vanished in a blink, leaving behind a lingering echo of menace. The roots collapsed, and the forest fell silent, save for the ragged breaths of those left standing. Leonce looked down at the boy, now peacefully still, the curse lifted but the danger far from gone. Miriam collapsed beside the altar, exhausted but triumphant. They had won this battle, but the war with the plague's dark power was only just beginning. Just as relief began to settle, the boy's eyes snapped open, glowing faintly once again, not with sickness, but with something else, something deeper and unknown. His lips parted in a whisper, "It's not over." The forest seemed to lean in, waiting for what would come next. The plague had chosen its vessel, and the story was far from finished. As the first light of dawn filtered through the tangled branches, a quiet calm settled over the forest clearing. The shadows that had once twisted and writhed around the altar now lay still, the curse seemingly broken for the moment. Leonce gently cradled the boy, whose eyes no longer glowed with the eerie light of the plague's touch, but shone clear and bright like any child should. The battle had been fierce, the tension thick as the darkness itself, but finally, a fragile hope had taken root. Miriam, still catching her breath, looked up at Leonce with a tired but relieved smile. "We've done what we came to do," she said softly. "The plague's grip on this boy has been lifted. For now, the curse has been broken." Her words felt like a balm, yet beneath them lingered an unspoken truth. They all knew the plague was not gone forever. It was a force that ebbed and flowed, a shadow lurking just beyond the light. Leonce nodded, his thoughts heavy with the knowledge that this victory was only one small part of a much larger struggle. The forest, with its ancient secrets and restless spirits, had reminded them that some battles were never truly over. "We must tell the others," he said. "This place, this plague, is not just a story for a few villages. It's a warning for all who live near these woods." The boy stirred in Leonce's arms, blinking up at him with innocent eyes that seemed to carry a wisdom far beyond his years. "The curse, it's still inside me," the boy whispered, voice fragile but clear. "But now I can fight it." Leonce's heart clenched at the weight of those words. The boy was more than a victim. He was a symbol of resilience. The plague might have chosen him as its vessel, but he was not powerless. With care and courage, he could become the key to keeping the darkness at bay. Miriam gathered her scrolls, the ancient texts that had guided their perilous journey. There are remedies hidden in these writings, herbs, rituals, and knowledge passed down by those who once faced the plague. It's up to us to preserve this wisdom and share it. The quiet forest around them seemed to breathe in that moment, as if acknowledging their vow. The kept, those shadowy guardians of the forest's secrets, began to retreat, their duty fulfilled, for now. Yet the memory of their presence lingered like a gentle warning. Vigilance must never waver. Leonce and Miriam exchanged a look, one of understanding and unspoken resolve. They had glimpsed the darkness at the heart of the plague, but they had also seen the spark of hope. The balance between life and death, sickness and healing, was fragile. It depended on the choices they would make going forward. As they prepared to leave the forest, the boy clung to Leonce's side, no longer a helpless vessel, but a young warrior in his own right. The journey ahead would be long, filled with challenges both seen and unseen. But with each step, they carried the strength of those who had come before them, the knowledge that even in the bleakest times, the human spirit could endure. Back in the village, word of their return spread quickly. Faces once shadowed by fear now held cautious hope. The plague had taken so much, lives, families, and peace, but it had not taken everything. Stories would be told of the brave few who ventured into the heart of darkness and emerged with a chance for healing. Leonce found himself sitting by the fire that night, the boy asleep nearby, his breathing steady and calm. He reflected on the strange and terrifying path they had walked, the chilling forests, the whispering kept, and the ancient power of the plague itself. It had been a journey into the unknown, a test of faith and courage. He understood now that the plague doctors of old, often seen as mysterious or even frightening figures, had carried burdens far heavier than most could imagine. Their work was not just about treating sickness. It was a fight against something primal and relentless, a battle against death's shadow creeping through the world. The lessons from this story were clear. History may call the plague doctors boring or dull, but their true stories reveal the opposite, filled with danger, mystery, and an unyielding will to protect humanity. In the face of overwhelming odds, they stood between life and oblivion, a reminder that even the darkest chapters of history are woven with threads of bravery and hope. Leonce smiled softly, feeling the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of the boy beside him. The plague was not over. It never truly would be. But in the struggle, they had found something essential, the power to resist, to heal, and to keep moving forward. As the night deepened, A gentle breeze rustled the leaves outside. It carried a faint, distant whisper, not of death, but of life enduring. And with that, the story settled into the quiet rhythms of the world, leaving behind a truth that would linger long after the last ember faded. Even in the most boring or forgotten corners of history, there is a story worth telling. A story of survival, courage, and the endless fight against the darkness. And so, the tale of the plague doctor, the cursed boy, and the ancient forest came to a close. But the echo of their struggle remained, a reminder that sometimes the most unassuming stories hold the deepest lessons. History, even when it feels boring or distant, is alive with the spirit of those who dared to face the worst and chose to hope.